Welcome to Haunted Canada. Hi everyone, this is Nadine, and I want to sincerely thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast, Haunted Canada. I truly do appreciate it. If you'd like to support this podcast and give us a boost, I would encourage you to give us a 5-star review, follow us, and share this podcast with a friend. On episode 7, we're going to dive into 3 more ghost stories from across Canada. First, we're going to talk about a famous ghost story from New Brunswick, the Dungarvan Hooper. Then, we're off to Toronto to hear the many ghost stories surrounding the Elgin Wintergarden Theatre. And then we're over to Ottawa to hear some of the spookiest and horrific stories surrounding the historic Ottawa Jail Hostel. The Dungarvan River flows through central New Brunswick, winding its way towards the Miramichi River. The area surrounding the waters is covered in thick and dense forests, a perfect setting for the chilling legend of the Dungarvan Hooper. The story dates back to a time when the forest were unsettled and bustling with lumber camps, as lumber was in high demand by shipyards, and it was a way for men to make good money. It was hard and dangerous work, yet thousands and thousands of men would spend weeks and months in the lumber camps cutting down trees, making money to support their families. One version of the tale tells of a phantom locomotive lost during the Great Miramichi Fire of 1825. The crew of the train, determined to escape the flames, rode the train through the fire, but the train was never found. It's said that the haunting screams echoing through the forest belonged to this lost locomotive, becoming part of the Hooper legend. However, the popular version and most famous revolves around a young Irish cook by the name of Ryan Garvan, who arrived at the isolated lumber camp in 1827. When Ryan arrived at the remote lumber camp, he had with him all of his worldly possessions, including a waist belt stuffed full of coins and large bills. From the articles and the research that I have read about this story, Ryan was described as a tall young man who had a positive outlook and would often hoop and holler with the lumberjacks in the camps, having a good time or celebrating. While many of the men in these lumber camps would spend their evenings gambling or drinking, Ryan would do neither, and would often tell the lumberjacks that he was saving his money to help pay his mother's medical bills. Ryan was a cook by trade, and he enjoyed his job, and normally he was the first person awake in the morning. As the cook, Ryan would have to be the first person up to get the meals ready, and then to ensure that the men at the camp had their food in their pails for lunch, which usually consisted of salt beef and bread. Ryan was also the camp alarm clock, as once he had breakfast all ready, he would then let out a hoop and a holler, waking all the men up in the cabin. This always did the trick, and the men would slowly crawl out of their beds, making their way to breakfast. Soon, the camp boss saw Ryan's money belt, and greed got the better of him, and he wanted the money for himself. The camp boss kept a close eye on Ryan, waiting for the right time to steal the money. Then one day, the right opportunity presented itself, as the men gathered their equipment to head off into the woods to start cutting lumber. The camp boss decided to stay back at the camp that day, and the boss knew, with everyone away, that it would be the perfect time to steal from Ryan. Yet as he tried to take the money from Ryan, a violent fight broke out. Ryan would not give up the money so easily, as it was everything that he had saved. Yet the camp boss was determined to get the money, and after many blows, he ended up murdering Ryan. Even as Ryan's dead body lay on the cold ground of the camp, the boss showed no remorse, as he immediately took the money belt from Ryan's waist and began to count out the coins and large bills. However, soon, the rest of the men returned to the camp from cutting trees all day and discovered Ryan's lifeless body on the cold ground. When the lumbermen inquired with the camp boss as to what had happened to Ryan, the camp boss made up an excuse, saying that Ryan had gotten sick earlier in the day and suddenly just died. The lumbermen shook their heads. they didn't really believe the camp boss's story. But he was the boss, and he ruled with an iron fist. When the lumbermen looked at Ryan's body, they noticed multiple bruises, and of course, they noticed that his money belt was missing. And when they pressed the camp boss for answers as to where the money belt had gone, the boss refused to answer, saying that he just simply didn't know. The lumbermen didn't really know what to do, as they were deep in the forest, so they had to take the camp boss at his word. As the night was falling, the men knew that they had to bury the lifeless body of Ryan. So some of the men, along with the murderer, the camp boss, picked up Ryan's cold, dead body and carried it into the woods, where Ryan was buried in a shallow grave close to a spring. Yet as the men walked back to the camp, a terrible storm began to brew, and the winds raged all around them, and they could hear the screams and the whooping sounds flowing through the trees. The whooping sounds got louder and louder, and were coming from the direction of where they had just buried Ryan's body. The men knew that it was the ghost of Ryan, wandering the dark New Brunswick woods, screaming for revenge. The terrifying screams and whooping of Ryan's spirit continued through the night, and all of the men of the camp, including the murderer, the camp boss, were frozen with fear. When the sun rose on the camp the next morning, every single man picked up their bags and left, deserting the camp, never to return again. This story has been handed down through those working and living in the New Brunswick area, and is well known within the local culture and folklore. It was taken seriously enough by the turn of the century that Reverend Edward Murdoch, a Roman Catholic priest, performed an exorcism at the believed gravesite of the Hooper Spring in New Brunswick. However, despite attempts by a priest to quiet the spirit and the ghostly cries of Ryan, you can still hear the echoing screams through the New Brunswick woods. Even stranger is that over the years, when people are working or camping in the area, that they can often get the lingering smell of bacon frying. This smell, so deep in the woods, is believed to be that of the Irish camp cook Ryan, still doing his job, but specifically cooking bacon, which his murderer, the camp boss, loved so much. And many believe that it is a ploy by the ghostly spirit of Ryan to lure his murderer, the camp boss, back into the dark woods to seek revenge. To this day, the whooping sound is believed to be the terrifying screams of Ryan Garvan before he was so brutally murdered. There have been thousands of accounts of people in the area, either out for a walk, hunting, or fishing, who have heard the blood-curdling screams and hoops and hollers of Ryan's restless spirit wandering throughout the forest, still seeking revenge for his untimely and horrific murder in 1827. The beautiful Elgin and Wintergarden Theatre in Toronto, Ontario, opened in 1913 and was originally named after Mr. Lowe, head of a chain of theatres known as Lowe's Vaudeville Theatre. This beautiful Edwardian-style double-decker theatre in the heart of Toronto is steeped full of heritage and history, and is one of the area's most haunted theatres, with numerous ghost stories including the Lavender Lady, the Unfriendly Ghost, and Sam. The theatre was eventually purchased by the Ontario Heritage Association in 1981 and declared a historic site in 1982, as it was important to preserve the classic Edwardian style and double-decker style theatre that it had. After a lengthy restoration was completed in 1989, it revealed breathtaking architecture and memorabilia, while also unearthing many of the theatre's ghosts. Over the years, numerous employees of the theatre and volunteers have reported seeing the ghostly apparition of a musician called Sam. Sam was a well-known musician who played the saxophone during the vaudeville era. He was an amazing musician, and mesmerized audiences with his exceptional performances that often would result in standing ovations to sold-out crowds. During one performance, as Sam was playing the saxophone on stage in front of a full theater, he was not really paying attention to where he was walking on stage and tragically fell into the orchestra pit. It was that fall that killed him, breaking his neck instantly. Over the years, many people have reported still seeing Sam wandering throughout the theater, playing the saxophone that he loved in life. On any given day when the theater is empty, staff and cleaning crew can often hear the sounds of an amazing saxophone being played. All the staff know that it is Sam playing the saxophone that he loves so much in life. Other employees have spoken about theater seats mysteriously flipping up and down as if someone is sitting in them when the theater is completely empty, and on other occasions, lights in the opulent theater will go on and off all by themselves. The most famous ghost story of these two theaters is that of the Lavender Lady, a fragrant and spooky ghost story that has been passed down. Many years ago, a young lady was in the washroom when she was violently attacked and stabbed. The lady was able to get away from the attacker and made her way to the front lobby. Fearing that the attacker would find her, the lady hid in the elevator. The elevator doors quickly closed, with a dying woman covered in blood on the inside. The elevator went all the way to the top floor. Yet sadly, when the elevator doors opened, the woman's dead body fell out onto the floor, covered in blood. It is one of the reasons why many people will often see a woman in a blood-stained dress appearing in the elevator, while on other occasions, the elevator doors will open and close repeatedly, with the elevator often getting stuck between floors. And guests have often said that when they're in the elevator, that they'll see blood smeared on the elevator doors and on the walls. As all these strange and ghostly things happen within the theater, many employees say that as soon as it does, they'll often get the smell of lavender. And it is then when everyone realizes that the spirit of the Lavender Lady is present. While it's always good to believe that most ghosts are friendly, unfortunately, the Elgin and Wintergarden Theater does have its own unfriendly ghost who goes by the name of Sam. Legend has it that Sam was a construction worker during the theater's renovations in the 1980s, when tragically he lost his balance and fell off the mezzanine level to the ground and to his death. It was a tragic death that shook many of the employees to their core, and it is believed that Sam's spirit is still upset by his sudden passing, with many employees reporting that when they're in the theater, that they'll often hear a man laughing or get the sense as if someone is pushing them from behind. On other occasions, when staff are walking in the theater, they'll often hear footsteps behind them, but when they check, there's never anybody there. One employee reported that when she began to hear footsteps behind her and noticed nobody there, that she began to quicken her pace. But the sounds of the phantom footsteps quickened their pace as well. This employee became so scared that she ran out of the theater. Many people at the theater believe that it is Sam still making his presence known throughout the building where he so tragically died. Like most theaters around the world, the Elgin Wintergarden Theater is steeped full of history and heritage, but it is also filled with ghosts and tragic deaths. It is an absolutely beautiful theater on the inside, and if you ever get a chance to visit it in Toronto, Ontario, please do, and talk to the staff, as they love to tell visitors their own personal ghost stories as well. In the year 1880, living in Ottawa, Canada came with many grave consequences for those who found themselves on the wrong side of the law and were found guilty of any major or minor offenses. A chilling and sometimes deadly destiny awaited men, women, and children as young as 6 at the notorious Ottawa Jail. Today, the historic building is a hostel and is believed to be haunted by the many ghosts of prisoners that died due to inhumane living conditions within the stone walls and were secretly buried in unmarked graves on the prison grounds, and the documented 3 prisoners that were hung in the prison's gallows. Initially constructed in 1862, the Ottawa Jail was designed by Henry Horsney and was a foreboding building that stood across the street from the courthouse, which was connected by an airy underground tunnel. Sometimes referred to in history books as the Nicholas Street Jail, the Ottawa Jail, as we'll refer to it in this podcast, known as a grim and haunted fortress, operated as a central penitentiary in Ottawa for over a century. Within the confines of the Ottawa Jail, a macabre reality festered beneath its imposing facade. The jail was made up of 60 cramped cells and 3 larger chambers hosting up to 150 inmates at any given time. But in reality, it was always overcrowded. There were 6 solitary confinement cells, while the top floor was reserved for those condemned to death row. Men, women, and children found themselves confined within the prison walls, with their crimes ranging from horrific acts of murder and assault to trivial offenses such as disorderly conduct, pickpocketing, or drunkenness. And a person or child could have been put into prison for using foul and argumentative language, especially if you were heard insulting or arguing in public. Sadder is the fact that sometimes entire families were put into the prison because they had taken on too much debt. And because they were unable to repay the debt, the entire family was in prison for an undetermined amount of time. What was even more inhumane is that in the early days, there was no separate laws for children who would often face the same punishment or criminal charges as an adult, which would result in children also being sent to the terrifying Ottawa Jail. While children under the age of 12 were normally sent to the women's side of the prison, this was often not the case, and it is documented that the youngest child at the Ottawa Jail was only 6 years old. When the Ottawa Jail was originally opened in 1862, it was considered a modern facility, and many believing that it was a much-needed improvement on the previous jail, which was in the basement of the county courthouse on Daly Street, built in 1842, that would eventually showcase the true inhumanity that prisoners were living in. In the basement of this first jail, prisoners were not only living in inhumane conditions, but they were subjected to countless abuse, with one of them being the worst, starvation. The conditions in that first basement jail in 1842 were so horrendous, it soon became known that money that was supposed to be used to purchase food for the prisoners was being misappropriated. Over the next few years, a grand jury was convened, and they began to investigate the conditions of the basement jail, and they soon realized that the prisoners were living in inhumane conditions. The prisoners did not receive proper food or nourishment, they did not get any fresh air or exercise, and they were living in such unsanitary conditions that the prison inspectors said that it was totally unfit in every respect. When a grand jury was inspecting the basement prison in 1861, they were horrified by what they had seen and labeled it as a miserable and poisonous basement miscalled a prison. Inspectors rated it the worst in Upper Canada, and the first basement jail was so inhumane as prisoners were literally living in their own feces and filth. Thankfully, this basement prison closed, and it was hoped that the next prison, the Ottawa Jail, would be a much-needed improvement. However, it turned out not to be the case. By 1862, a new prison was built on Nicholas Street, now known, of course, as the Ottawa Jail. And while many believed that this new prison was a vast improvement upon the horrendous conditions of the previous basement jail, over time, many began to realize that prisoners, including men, women, and children, were still subject to inhumane conditions, and that the conditions at the Ottawa Jail had not changed and were horrendous. There was such overcrowding within the Ottawa Jail that death and disease again were rampant. There was no heat, lights, or ventilation within the cells, and again, there were no toilets. So in these overcrowded prison cells, prisoners, including the men, women, and children, were once again living in their own filth. The Ottawa Journal newspaper called the Ottawa Jail a medieval dungeon and a discreditable state, and that no human community should tolerate it. However, nothing changed, and the inhumane conditions at the Ottawa Jail continued until it was inspected again in 1945, when it was strongly recommended that the facility should close. But as we all know, building a prison takes time, with a lot of government red tape, and the Ottawa Jail and the horrible conditions that the prisoners had to endure and live in would sadly continue on for another 27 years. But eventually, the Ottawa Jail closed in 1972, and the building was purchased by International Hostel. The building was left intact and not only became a place for people to find cheap accommodations, it quickly became known as a place of many hauntings and ghosts from the spirits of the many inmates who died within its walls. Since its conversion into a hostel, reports of paranormal activity have been common among staff and visitors. Disembodied footsteps, voices, and eerie tapping sounds have been heard throughout the building, particularly on the top floor, known as Death Row. Guests have witnessed unsettling phenomenons, from moving objects to ghostly figures and chilling screams in the dead of night, believed to be the spirits of the men, women, and children that died within the walls of the unforgiving prison. In the 110 years that the Ottawa Jail operated, we now know that there were countless deaths within the jailhouse walls from insufficient food and horrible living conditions, and that these prisoners' deaths were undocumented, and that they were secretly buried around the jail site grounds in unmarked graves. Recently, when some of the parking lot area around the Ottawa Jail Hostel had to be partially dug up to build the Mackenzie King Bridge, the remains of 140 bodies were found. These bodies are believed to be the prisoners of the Ottawa Jail that had died inside, but were never documented or reported, and many of the restless spirits that still wander throughout the jail to this day. The history of the Ottawa Jail is steeped in horror and tragedy, with only 3 official executions on record. The most famous and notorious inmate in the prison was Patrick James Whelan. He was in prison and then hung on February 11, 1869, before a crowd of 5,000 men, women, and children for the death of the Canadian diplomat Thomas D'Arcy McGee. Patrick pleaded that he was not guilty until his very last breath. His body was supposed to be transported back to Montreal, but he was buried on the prison grounds in an unmarked grave. Today, everyone believes that it is the vengeful ghost of Patrick James Whelan that is still wandering throughout the hostel and is angry that his body was never returned to his beloved Montreal. Patrick's ghost is often seen wandering the corridors on death row, while on other occasions, people who are brave enough to stay or sleep on death row have reported seeing the presence of a man standing in their cell or sitting on the edge of their bed. It is widely believed that the spirit of Patrick James Whelan, who was hung at the prison in 1869, is still present at the Ottawa Jail Hostel. The second execution was that of William George Seabrook in 1933. William was hung at the jail for shooting a garage service employee in a robbery that took place 2 years earlier. The ghostly spirit of William is believed to be haunting the Ottawa Jail Hostel still to this day. Employees will often get a sense of someone whispering in their ear, yet when they turn around, there's never anybody there. Yet many people report that when they hear somebody whispering in their ear, all they can hear is somebody saying, "Forgive me, please forgive me." The third and last execution that happened at the Ottawa Jail was that of Eugene Larmont that happened on March 27, 1946. He was hung for the murder of an Ottawa police detective, Thomas Stoneman. Employees who work at the Ottawa Jail Hostel today report that many strange and mysterious things happen on almost a daily basis. Cell doors will often mysteriously open and close, or get stuck as if someone's holding them from the other side. People report that when they're sleeping in the hostel overnight, they can often hear the sounds of someone crying or sobbing coming from the room next to them that is usually empty. Many people believe that the souls of the restless spirits of the former prisoners that died within the prison walls are still restless and wandering throughout the grounds. Since being turned into a hostel, many paranormal experiences have been sensed and seen by the staff and the guests of the Ottawa Hostel Jail. People report hearing disembodied footsteps and voices throughout the building, but mainly when staff are near empty cells and especially on the top floor, death row. Many staff say that when they're walking throughout the jail, doing their daily checks, that they'll often hear knocking and tapping sounds on the walls all around them, as if someone is tapping on the metal bars of the jail cells. Staff have said that when they hear the tapping sounds on the metal doors, that they'll then notice that the jail cell doors will begin to slowly rock back and forth, and that objects within the cells will begin to move. One employee said that when he was doing his nightly checks on each floor, he began to hear the tapping sound on a cell door to his right. He said that he stopped walking and noticed that the very cell door where the tapping sound was coming from, that the cell door was now moving back and forth when something caught his eye. When the employee looked into the jail cell, his eyes began to focus on the bed, when he noticed that the bed sheets and the pillow were moving, as if someone or something was sitting down and lying on the bed, placing their head on the pillow. This particular employee had been working at the Ottawa Jail Hostel for many years, yet this was the first time that he had seen anything like this, and it created such a sense of dread and fear in him that he quickly left death row. While other staff and visitors of the hostel who have stayed in the building overnight report hearing the sounds of scratching and screaming while they're sleeping in some of the cell rooms. One young lady who was traveling across Canada and was looking for some cheap accommodations decided to stay at the Ottawa Jail Hostel for a few nights. As she had been traveling all day, she was looking forward to a peaceful night's sleep. However, she was awakened at around 3 a.m. by the feeling as if someone was tugging on her bedsheets. The traveler said that when she woke up, she noticed the figure of a woman in her room standing at the foot of her bed. The young traveler described the woman standing at the foot of her bed as being around aged 18, dressed in dark and dirty, raggedy clothes. The ghostly apparition of the woman was very pale and thin, almost translucent, she said. The traveler was terrified, just lying in her bed, when the apparition of the woman began to walk towards her, her hands outstretched, when the ghostly figure began to scream. The traveler was terrified, and she began to scream as well, waking everybody up in the hostel. The staff ran to her cell to see what was the matter. When the young lady described to the employees what she had just seen and experienced, the employees of the Ottawa Jail Hostel, of course, told her the many ghosts that are roaming throughout the hostel to this day. The young traveler was quite shaken and was not able to sleep for the rest of the night, and by 6 a.m., she packed her bags and left. Even though she had booked for 3 more nights at the hostel, she decided that one night was enough. While even odder is the fact that female staff and visitors have spoken of seeing a faceless woman walking in and out of the women's bathroom. Over the years, employees and visitors have literally bumped into this woman, and when they stop to turn around to excuse themselves or see if the woman needs any help, they'll notice that the woman turns into an apparition and that the woman is faceless. This, of course, has scared so many visitors and employees that a lot of the female employees at the Ottawa Jail Hostel will not go to the bathroom by themselves. The basement of the Ottawa Jail Hostel is actually known as the Gallows, where 3 executions did take place, a focal point for paranormal experiences. Visitors have experienced the sensation of being watched, hearing mysterious footsteps, and encounters with unexplained phenomenon, adding to the hostel's haunted reputation. Today, there is a noose hanging in the gallows to give the visitors a sense of what it would have looked like 100 years ago. However, staff and visitors have said that when they're just walking or visiting the area, that they'll notice that the noose, which is usually completely still, will begin to suddenly sway back and forth. And on other occasions, visitors reported hearing heavy footsteps walking all around them, and the sounds of disembodied voices while they're in the execution area. While you're in the basement area, you can also view the solitary confinement rooms known as the Hole that were used back in the day to place prisoners in for solitary confinement. The prisoners that were placed in the Hole were often chained, naked, to the cold stone floor for up to 23 hours a day as a form of punishment. The original rings that the prisoners were chained to are still bolted to the ground for the visitors to see. Many people have said that when they went on a tour of the Hole, they reported having an overwhelming sense of dread and foreboding, with many people pushing their way out of the room or never wanting to go inside. Another infamous spot within the hotel is called the Lounge. Today, it is a place for visitors to relax. However, back in the 1800s, it was used to house the women and the children within the prison. And over the years, employees and visitors to the lounge area have reported seeing the ghostly apparition of women and children dressed in early 1900s attire wandering up and down the hallway. And on other occasions, whimpering cries can be heard in the corner, and the screams of children can be heard echoing up and down the hallways. One employee told me that one evening she decided to take a tennis ball into the lounge area to see what would happen. When the lounge area was empty with no guests, she rolled the tennis ball up the empty hallway into the lounge area, only to have the ball mysteriously rolled back to her. She did this a few more times, and the ball would come back to her every single time. However, the last time that she rolled the ball up the empty hallway of the lounge, the ball was never returned, and all she could then hear is the sounds of children giggling and laughing. The restless spirits of the Ottawa Jail are a grim reminder of the injustices and horrors that once permeated its walls. As the shadows of the past converge with the present, the Ottawa Jail Hostel stands as a chilling monument to a very dark and haunted history. Well, everyone, that is the end of episode 7 of Haunted Canada, and I want to sincerely thank every single person for taking the time to listen to this podcast and all the other episodes. I truly do appreciate it. If you have enjoyed this podcast and you'd like to support, please take the time to leave a 5-star review, follow us on all the platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and share the podcast with a friend. Also, if you have any of your own ghost stories, hauntings, or true crimes that you would like for us to cover on this podcast, please email us through our website, hauntedcanada.com. Again, thank you to every single person who has taken the time to listen to this podcast. I truly do appreciate it. Have a good night, everyone, and stay safe.